Hello everyone, this is Athir Mohsen speaking, the lecturer of poetry in the third class, University of Basra, College of Arts, Departments of English for the year 2019s and 2020s. The lecture is going to be about William Blake, the third pillar of Romantic era. In fact, William Blake, he lives into two periods of literature. The first one is the transitional period that preceded Romanticism, which is called the pre-Romantic period, as well as the Romantic periods of literature. The lecture includes two parts. The first part, William Blake's life and works, and the second part is William Blake's London, the most famous poems written by Blake. Starting by the first division of this lecture, William Blake's life and works. William Blake was born in London on November 28, 1757. He attended a Downing school for 4 years and in 1772 began a 7-year apprenticeship to James Bazier's engraver. At the age of 22, Blake became a student of the Royal Academy. He was a vehement supporter of the French Revolution and attended radical gathering. In 1782, Blake married Catherine Poacher. In 1800, he moved to Phillingham near Chichester at the innovations of William Haley. In 1804, he was tried for seditions, and was acquitted. In 1809, he had his one and only exhibitions of 16 paintings. On August 12, 1827, William Blake died and passed away. In fact, William Blake or the works of William Blake have been gained recognitions definitely after his death. In 1784, Blake composed his unfinished manuscript, An Island in the Moon. After 1788, he published several collections of poems. Here is no natural religion, or among them here is no natural religion, and all religions are one. He wrote poems and printed the Songs of Experiences in 1789. In 1730s, he wrote Visions of the Daughters of Alipun. In 1790, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. In 1793, Blake issued a prospectus to the public. In 1794, the Songs of Innocence was published again, together with the Songs of Experience. In 1804, Blake started the Iki both Milton's and Jerusalem. In fact, or as a reality, Blake's poetry has generally been divided into two groups. The first group, lyrical poems, poetical sketches, 1783, the Songs of Innocence, 1789, the Songs of Experience 1794. A prophetic, or the second division of the second group, prophetic books contain Tyrrell in 1789, the Book of Thale in 1789, Milton in 1808, Jerusalem in 1818, and The Ghost of Abel in 1822. Starting by the second part of this lecture, which is specified for the famous poem written by William Blake, it is London. Starting by an introduction to the poem, or Blake, often referred to as a social commentator. A large number of Blake's poems focus on similar themes that were relevant to the society in which he was writing, such as poems on industrialization, child labor, and the more general notions of man versus nature and the individual against society, and etc. etc. London is no exception to this, acting as a social commentator on Blake's time. At first, Blake loved London. He wrote that golden London and her silver Thames, thronged with shining spires and corded ships. This is from the Poetical Sketches. But after the French Revolution, the British government began to oppress the civil democratic activities. Then London was quite different from before. Everything was covered with darkness, terror, and miseries. In this poem, Blake draws from his personal observations and gives a comprehensive picture of the many miseries, physical and spiritual, in the English capital London. He paints a picture of dirty, miserable streets of London and describes the wretched people at the bottom of the society, the chimney sweepers, soldiers, and harlots. The entire poem centers on the wails of these people from their pain and the injustice done to them, and exposes the gap between those in power and in misery of poor people. The poem is representative of English economics problems of the time, condemning many powerful institutions such as the church, royalty, the new industries, and the military. The main object and theme of this poem is man's lack of freedom and the causes of this lack. It is a relatively unique poem in that it takes such a negative and critical view of London, when at the time the city represented the pinnacle of technology and was considered the center of Western culture and British Empire. This is, in short, a very short introduction to the poem. The poem London is divided into four quatrains, or four parts, for stanzas as well. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and marks in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church bells, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood's down palace's walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hears. Starting with the poem by a short critical summary. This poem, or the poem London, was written during the time of a French Revolution and shows the poet's views of 18th century London, a place where he lived nearly all his life. Blake was considered an eccentric and a madman, and in his lifetime, and it was only after his death that his works gained recognition. He had lived most of life in poverty and was buried in an unmarked grave in Bunhill Fields in London. So starting by the short summary for each stanza of the poem. Stanza first. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and marks in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. The poem has a total of 16 lines, which are split into 4 paragraphs, 4 stanzas or 4 quatrains, with a rhyming AB, AB. A B pattern throughout the poem. In the first paragraph, it is with a sarcasm that Blake describes the sight he sees as he walks through the streets of London. The repetitive use of the word chartered stresses Blake's anger at the political times and his feelings toward the ruling classes with their controlling laws and oppressive ways. He turns the poem, or in the poem, to say that it is not only every street they wants to control, but even the river Thames, which should normally be free for all, but in this case it is too chartered. Thus the poem focuses on the social and political background of London and highlights differences in the wealth of the ruling classes and the poverty facing the common man. Free speech is curtailed to avoid Londoners following the example of their French counterparts. The people of London are described as being weak and full of woe, as the marks on their faces reveals. There is a repetition on the word marks, which again stresses the despair and tiredness that they seems to be going through because of their oppressive ways of life. Being a mystical person himself, Blake uses the expression marks of woe in an almost religious sense. He is being the onlooker in this poem, and as he walks past, he can see the weakness and misery marked on the faces of the passer due to their helplessness at not being able to bring about any changes in their destiny. In the second stanza, in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind's forge manacles I hear. Though the feelings of every man and child are suppressed, it is as if the fear and their cries are audible to him as he walks by. Again, his mystical side can be seen because throughout his lifetime he was said to have spiritual visions. Through their silence, he can still hear all that they want to say about cannot because of fear of authority. There is a lack of free expressions, and he uses the word ban, which is quite clear in its meaning and reveals how people were unable to voice their criticisms on how the country was being ruled. No one dared to speak out for fear of being imprisoned. The words fear, cry, band, and mind forge manacle describe a people who are suffering and frightened, and their feelings are imprisoned in their own minds. There is a repetition of words like every on the first three verses to stress these feelings of being imprisoned and trapped. And the third quatrain, how the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church bells, and the hapless soldier sigh, runs in blood down palace's walls. In the third paragraph, he talks about the chimney sweepers and the hapless soldiers, and in his finger of blame points to palaces of authority like the church and the palace, or places of authority like the church and the palace. The word appalls, sighs, and run in blood show authority being immune to its common people who are in distress, but there seems to be no comfort coming their way. The chimney sweeper represents the destitute children, while the soldiers represents the anguish of those who had to serve in the army under difficult conditions. Their blood is being split down the palace's walls, while the cries of the suffering children are blackening the church, which should bring light to its people. The combination of helpless on one side and the unhearing authority on the other is both stark and accusatory in its tone. And the final verse of the poem, but most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hairs. In this final quatrain, Blake takes on an even more forbidding tones as he talks about the young girl who is out in the darkness of the night walking the streets. Young women had to resort to prostitution because of poverty, and he can hear her curses for what she has to be put through. Her grief affects the newborn child, and he uses powerful words like blastes, which is a contrast to the gentleness one would use for a newborn child. It is as if he can foresee the difficulties that child will have to suffer, just like his mother is doing. In contrast, a rich woman getting married in a carriage will be blighted by this curse, and her courage might turn out to be a hearse. Blake is pointing a finger at the rich man who might uses the service of a prostitute and then gets married and pass on disease to their wives. He uses the words plagues to signify the goings-ons of the rich and how their actions affect the lives of all innocent people involved. These poems, no matter how brutal and harsh in its message, has relevance even in modern times, where there is poverty due to large income discrepancies between rich and poor. Technically speaking, the poem or the poet uses different kinds of technical feature in this poem, like images, capitalizations, choice of words, language, rhyme and rhythm, repetition, and different ways and specification in this very short poem that is so much representative of everything in life. So focusing on the technical features in this poem, starting with the first one, which is the use of images. Images in the poem, for instance, if we are going to deal with the poem from the beginning, in the first or the first image in the first stanza, represented by these words: the mind's forge manacles I hear. The key image in this poem is the mind forge manacles, attitudes which takes away our freedom of thoughts and action. Three powerful examples of those who are not free, or three encounters who have weaknesses and woe, are the chimney sweeper, the soldier, and the harlot. The first image, the mind forge manacle of the second stanza, is the key image and the central metaphor of this poem. Blake imagines the mind as a forge where manacles are made. Manacles and shackles for the legs would be seen on convicts, perhaps passing along the streets on their ways to prisons, or commonly in London in Blake's time on their way to ships for transportation to Australia or different parts of the world. For Blake and his readers, the image is very striking and horrible. The image is also an allusion to an even more famous statement. In 1762, some 30 years before Blake wrote London, the Swiss philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote in the Social Contract, "Man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains." Blake agrees with Rousseau that man's lack of freedom, his manacles are mind forged. They come from the ideas and outlook imposed on us by external authority. Mind forged manacles lie at the heart of the poem. The example of the example of the mind forged manacles start with the chimney sweeper or sweepers. As the church building is literally blackening with the smoke from the chimneys, so the church as an organization which should help the poor is blackened metaphorically with shame at its failure to give that help to poor people and children. The church should be appalled by the cry of the chimney sweeper. In the same folds of images used in the poem London by William Blake, The second image is the hapless soldier. The poem was written shortly after the start of the French Revolution. The uprising was so bloody that the figure of speech called hyperbole was often used, as blood was said to be running down the walls. Blake shows how the unhappiness of the English soldiers could, if its causes were ignored, lead to similar bloodshed here. The third part of the first technical feature is the images could be seen in the last stanza. The last image, the harlot. The harlot is the most shocking to Blake as well as to us as reader. The harlot is the truth behind respectable ideas of marriage. A new birth is not a happy event, but only to continue the cycle of misery, and the wedding carriage is seen as a hearse leading to a kind of death. The word Blake's here suggests the sexually transmitted diseases which the youthful harlot would contract and pass on to other, giving her cursing words real destructive power. The second points of the technical features in London by William Blake is the use of capitalization. For instance, in stanza 2, capitalization is used extensively throughout the poem to infer something beyond the simple meaning of the words. It usually means something deeper. For instance, the capitalization of man in the second stanza, in every cry of every man. This capitalization suggests that the whole of urbanized society has gone to the state of moral decay and misery. Every infant's cry, the capital letter, shows that there is something beyond just children, that the persona meets also innocence, which is being corrupted by fear instead of child idealistically being given security or a heaven. Here they have to fear and be afraid. Capitalization is also used in the word chimney sweeper or chimney sweepers cry, church, soldier, palaces, harlots, and marriage. This is definitely starting from stanza 3, how the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church bells, and the hapless soldiers sigh, runs in blood down palaces' walls. Usually these kinds of words that have been capitalized to represent an idea beyond just the word, or an institution which will be criticized. For instance, man refers to urbanized society. We have the chimney sweeper. It refers to the child laborers who works in a very tough and hard conditions. The church is a representation of the religious institution that fails to help the poor people in the society of London during the times of William Blake. The word soldiers, it is a kind of image for the soldiers who are suffering during the times of the writing the poem of London, as well as the word palace is a representation of the royal family and the institution of ruling class. Capitalization is used a lot and represent the institution and is accompanied by the reason why Blake is satirizing these institutions. The third part of the technical features in the poem, which is the choice of words. In each stanza, the poets make use of specific words to show his anger and resentments from the situation that is going on in the times of writing this poem. The careful choice of some words also enhance the theme of this poem. So we are going to examine some examples of the words that have been specifically and carefully chosen by William Blake. For instance, in the first stanza, I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. The use of the word chartered in the first line is rich in imagery. It introduces imagery of mankind in bondage, showing that oppression, not freedom or individuality, is the condition of the London that Blake writes about. Chartered also means hired out or leased, and shows that the city is in the hands of the merchants, and even the street and the river Thames is being controlled for profits. The use of the word face in the first stanza dehumanize the words. The persona is not seeing marks of weakness or woe in a human person, just a blank face. The poet chooses the word face instead of person to show the loss and the sorrow of the people. While in stanza 3, the word blackening, in the second line, every blackening charchables, is an easy and common word, but in this poem the poet wonderfully chooses this word, which literally means blackening with smoke, but metaphorically means blackening with shame at its failure to give that help. At the same time, this word contrasts with abals, which means make bail. Such a simple word conveys so much information, so we have to admire the poet's techniques in choosing the words. And the same parts of the choice of words in stanza 4, the poet definitely in the second line chooses the word harlot. How the youthful harlot cares. Harlot is a biblical word and is stronger than prostitute. By using this word, the poet expresses his deep worry and strong condemnation of the society. And thus, or therefore, the last stanza is the most powerful part of the poem. The unfortunate women are forced to be harlot, just according to their curses. We can see everything covered with darkness, so the wedding becomes a funeral. Her marriage hers is an apparent contradiction and is a figure of speech known as oxymoron. It is used satirically to compare the wedding to a funeral and foretell that kinds of a future England must be faced with if things go like this. The fourth division of the technical features in London, the poem of William Blake, is the most significant feature that is so much interesting and captures the attentions of the reader, which is repetitions. And repetitions started from the beginning in the first line in the first stanza. In this poem, Blake uses many powerful devices to enhance the expressions of the theme, one of which is the use of repetition for special purposes. For instance, in the first stanza, I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In the first stanza, there is something awkward in the repetition of the word mark. The first mark is a verb. The second and last are nouns. So there were two complex effects: to observe marks, but he marks or marks. Blake reinforced the effect to being dragged into an imprisoned world where nothing reveals from the faces he meets but weakness and woe. In the second stanza, the repetition is still going on. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band. So the word in every have been repeated many times, or 3 to 4 times. In the second stanza, the poets even use every for 5 times, more than 4, more than 3, showing that no one can escape from the miserable and a tragic reality that is, there are the mind-forged manacles everywhere. The repetition of a cry of every man, infant, a cry of fear, the chimney sweeper's cry, and even the hapless soldier sight emphasizes how the people in London suffer at that time. We are moving to the fifth part of the technical features in London. It is magical, and it's marvelous rhyme and rhythm. This poem is famous for a highly strong musical pattern. Generally speaking, the rhyme and rhythm is very definite and structured. The rhyme is AB, AB, CD, CD, and this poem is written with a metrical pattern of iambic tetrameter, which blended with sometimes a trochaic tetrameter, which can help to accentuate the line with 7 syllables and the first word stressed. The changes are acquired by the special purposes. This means the emphasis of the meaning. The alteration of the stresses on the syllables in each line makes the poem sounds like striking of the anvil, and also helps the poems to be more powerful, more strong. So one of the most striking characteristics of this poem is the anvil music. In addition to the technical features mentions above, London begins with the verb set in the present tense. This implies that the poem concerns timeless realities, unbounded by references to any particular incidents. The use of a persona in this poem who clearly has first-hand knowledge of London's conditions lends credibility to the poem, making it more personal and emotive. Not so much far away from the technical features in the poem is the language used by Blake in his poem London. So the tone of the poem is at times biblical, reflecting Blake's strong interest in religion. It is as if the speaker is offering a prophecy of the terrible consequences unless changes are made in the city. Thus, in the first stanza, Blake uses repetition twice, first using the word chartered. This is a reference to the charter that allocate ownership and rights to a specific people. Many, including Blake's, saw this as a robbing ordinary people of their rights and freedom. The second use of repetition is with the words marks in the first stanza. This has a dual meaning. It refers to the physical marks carried by people as a result of the conditions they endure, and is also suggestive of the speaker recording evidence during his walk through the city streets. In the first three lines of stanza 2, the speaker makes it clear that every sound he hears is evidence of the mind's forged manacles. Manacles are like handcuffs. The speaker is suggesting that people's minds are restricted and confined, that the city has robbed them of the ability to think. The poem is full of negative words like weakness, woe, a cry, fear, apples, blood, blights, plagues, and hairs are just some of them. The poem ends with a startling contrast in the language choosing. Definitely marriage hurts. To Blake, marriage should be a celebration of love and the beginning of a new life. Yet here it is combined with the word hearse, a vehicle associated with a funeral. To the speaker of the poem, the future brings nothing but death and decay. The last part of this lecture is going to be about the critical overview of William Blake's London. William Blake, who lived in the later half of the 18th century and the early part of the 19th century, was a poet, a philosopher, a radical, an artist, and a great thinker, who was able to bring about remarkable results with the simplest of means. In all of his work, he wrote his poems with deep personal emotions, but if we look further and ignore the prophetic qualities, we discover a further intended meanings of a strong political and social level. He was a critic of his own era, but his poetry also strikes a chord in ours. Blake was one of several poets of the time who restored emotion and feelings into poetry, and thus was one of the first romantics. In fact, Blake lived during a period of intense social changes: the Industrial Revolution, the French Revolution, and the American Revolution. All happens during his lifetime. Blake was witness to the transformation of agriculture society to from agriculture society to an industrial society, which is where the basis for some of the of his poems stands. As an example, or a best example, or a good example, we may look towards William Blake's London from his Songs of Experience. Here Blake comments on a city he both loves and hates. It shows his disapproval of changes which occurred in his times. The poet describes the woes that the Industrial Revolution and the breakings of the common man's ties to the land results in. Therefore, he uses many methods to gain the perfect description of how he saw industrial London, but the most outstanding method is his use of imagery. His first use of imagery is the first and the second lines of the first stanza. He uses the word chartered street and chartered Thames. A charter is a legal document which or a legal works which gives a legal power to the council of a town or city, which allows them to be able to create their own laws within the boundaries of that place. The imagery suggests that not only do the streets of London have to follow the rules, but that the river Thames has to be regulated as well. The law marks have tamed and controlled a free flowing river. This use of imagery emphasizes that everything in the city, including natural forces, are enslaved by the city. And the next line, marks of weakness, marks of woe. There could be a play on word. Mark means both to see, to note, or to note. But then again, there could be another meaning, like a physical mark upon someone's face, like a sign of a grief or misery. The use of the word mark maybe is deliberately repeated to sound like the blows of a hammer. Blake uses this imagery to emphasize the pain which industrial London is reinforcing on the poor physically and mentally. Not far away from the imagery is the use of the mind-forged monocle in line 8, is used to describe why the people are so unhappy. This is because they are not free, as their lives are being controlled by oppressive or restrictive ideas within their own minds and created by the minds of others. Also, by using the manacles, the word sounds heavy, just like their plight or their problem. Blackening church bells is a vivid and a clear image. The church could be blackened literally because of the soot from London's chimneys, or it could be because the sun is setting and the outline of the church can be seen in the fading light. Blake's use of a blackening could be symbolic, or it has a symbolic meaning. The charge should be a source of moral warmth and light, is seen as cold and dark. There could be another meaning to the word apples, like a pall over a coffin, so it is used to emphasize that the church ignores what it doesn't want to see. Another shocking or surprising image is runs in blood. This is where the wounded soldier blood is running down the walls of the rulers for which he has been fighting. So it emphasizes the fact that the poor were being blocked out by the governments with no means to live and many to die. The youthful harlot's curse is a contradicting image which makes you think, or makes students think, how could a harlot be youthful? It shows that even children were subjected to the crimes of London. The curse could be seen in two ways. It could be that she is literally swearing, but it could also mean that the unhappy girl is cursing or blaming the hard, cold world she is living in. The most powerful use of imagery in this poem is the oxymoron blight with sight the merge hers. An image in which opposites collide with one another. A hearse, a vehicle for carrying the dead to the grave, being used to marriage. Sights are also more likely to be heard at funerals than marriages. But here Blake mixes the two together. At one level, it could be that Blake is arguing that it is wrong for prostitution to exist in the same society, or to exist in the society, to be found in the same society as a respectable legal marriage. At another, it could be that he is suggesting that men do go to prostitutes where marriage is cold and unloving, or were sexually oppressed. Yet at another level, a Blake can be mean diseased, and in the 18th century, diseased were common and could be fatal. The hearse could be a real one. In whatever context it was written, it is about, in particular, strong line which symbolizes the death or wrongdoing in the or industrial London. Blake uses much imagery of darkened things to stress how bleak and gloomy life is, with no light at the end of the tunnel. The rhythm of the poem is very slow and bounding, which emphasizes the darkness of London and the pace of London at the time. The punctuation in the poem increases the slowness, which enhances the effect of being trapped in a world there and there being no way to escape. The rhythm scheme is constant throughout the poem, which adds to the constant bounding, which is also achieved through Blake's use of iambic pentameter, and his use of repetition of words in the second stanza seems to stress the bounding of the poem further. Blake's use of imagery, repetition, punctuation, and rhythm all work together to produce a powerful work of art in the eyes or in the minds of reader. It shows how times really were in London and how it was impossible to break out of the manacles which society had set for the poor. Thus, London and many of Blake's other works with a similar theme, in particular those of Songs of Experience, strike a particular nerve for those who are living in a society where the cost of living compared with the income is steadily increasing, where disease are becoming increasingly common, and where the public is becoming increasingly disillusioned about the reliability and the trustworthiness of the politicians. Poems like London are those which can still be applied to cities today, which seems to be rapidly desynthesizing itself to the marks of weakness, marks of woe, which we are well accustomed to see on the faces of Baspire of today. And thank you for listening, for taking your time.